Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And as I'm recording this story for you, I'm surrounded by so much bird song, so it's a very beautiful day today. So I'm looking forward to sharing this fabulous story with you. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the rain poured down in sheets, creating squiggly patterns on the windscreen window. The sequestered country road was riddled with potholes that were now filled with muddy, rather murky water. Averil's white Hyundai was covered in dirty splotches, almost as if a kid had deliberately thrown brown paint over her vehicle. She tried her utmost, of course, to allow her car to glide smoothly over the uneven road, and as it did so, it rattled and jolted, rather like jelly beans in a glass jar. So much so, in fact, that the passengers on the back seat, that were 6-year-old Laurie and 10-year-old Sam, began to bounce around rather precariously, both of them giggling, as if they thought they were riding one of those carousel horses on the fairground. But let's just say the horses on this carousel were more than a little frisky. It certainly seemed that since they'd left the main highway a while back and eagerly traversed down these intrepid tributary country-like roads, the journey had turned exceedingly quickly from smoothly reliable to chaotically unpredictable, as the rubber tires of Averil's SUV certainly didn't appreciate wading through these large ponds of water that had flooded the road magnanimously. It certainly didn't help, of course, that the heavens were not on their side, for they had unabashedly opened with formidable intent, so the rain had just bolted down. In the distance you could hear the rumble of thunder, and the light of the afternoon began to fade, becoming significantly more subdued, almost as if it was early evening. The rain continued to pelt down, while the windscreen wipers earnestly struggled to fight back the constant deluge. Avril was playing some soft rock music on the radio, but the rain, as it continued pelting down, had successfully drowned out any background noises, as it was singing its own tune, it would seem. "Are you all right, kids?" asked Avril, looking back at her children, her face dappled with the maternal concern. "We're fine, Mum," said little Sam, who was staring out of his window, his nose pressed against the glass. He stared out of the glass pane, his keen eyes crowned with a profound sense of curiosity, as if he was soaking up the scenery around him like a sponge. "Mummy, why's the road so bumpy?" he asked. "There's a sloshy mud all over the place, and the rain just doesn't seem to stop. Why won't the rain stop, Mummy? It always stops back in Toronto." "Sometimes it just rains, doesn't it?" said Avril. "I know the weather appears abysmal, love, and I apologize for that, but there's nothing we can do about it right now because we're caught up in it. I never imagined we'd get stuck in this downpour like this, but you must remember, Sam, this isn't Toronto. At home the roads are nice and smooth, so they're easy to navigate. The reason I'm driving with such due caution is we're in a remote area far away off the beaten track, and I don't want to get our tires stuck in a muddy ditch somewhere, or then I'm going to have to call someone out to help. So I'm erring on the side of caution, because I don't want that to happen. I guess not too many people use these roads, so they don't bother to spend money on fixing them up. They're remote, that's why, and they're not very comfortable to drive down, especially when the weather is behaving as badly as it is now." "But why won't they fix the road up?" asked Sam. "Just because people don't use the road often doesn't mean it shouldn't be fixed." "You echo my sentiments exactly, love. I wish I could answer your question. But sometimes, when the authorities fix and repair roads, some roads, such as this, far off the beaten track, obviously get overlooked and forgotten about, don't they? Think about your father, for example, when he does those fix-up jobs around the house, although God knows when he last did anything at all.
but he leaves the least important jobs until last. Some things he still hasn't done, and he's left them on the back burner for years. I've been begging your father to repaint the postbox, for example. I'm sure you must have noticed our postbox has become incredibly rusty. But your father doesn't see that as an important job to do. I don't think the roads around here, likewise, are considered by the authorities to be on their most important list, much like our postbox is. But let's just say we make the most of a bad situation, don't we?
I think it's silly, said Sam. All roads should be fixed no matter where they are. Just like Daddy should paint our postbox. I've seen how rusty it's become. Everybody else's postbox is painted nicely. Ours should be too.
Well, you should speak to your father about that. Believe me, I've tried. I've even been thinking of painting the damn thing myself, because that postbox is in shoddy condition. It's an embarrassment.
I want to pee, Mummy,
came little Laurie's urgent voice in the back of the car.
I need to pee, Mummy,
she insisted again. Avril inwardly grimaced. She knew if she didn't stop the car at once, in the pouring rain, that little Laurie would pee all over the back seat. She had never known a child to have such a contrary, very fickle bladder. It would seem Laurie always needed to go to the toilet at the most inopportune times, like when they were driving on the middle of the highway, or caught up in heavy congested traffic. The last time Laurie had relieved herself over the back seat, the car had smelt of ammonia for months afterwards, and no matter how much air freshener Avril had put in the car, the rank smell refused to abate. She had recently lifted a girlfriend of hers from work, dropping her off at home, which was streets away from where she lived, and her friend had said, "My God! What is that odious, foul smell, Avril, in your car? It smells like a cat litter box that hasn't been cleaned in months." Avril had shamefully blamed the smell on their golden Labrador Jellicoe, who was currently patiently sitting on the front seat next to her, staring out of the window, his dark, soulful eyes watching the rain trickling down the windscreen like long, lonely tears. The dog, as usual, was causing no trouble at all, and as for his impeccable toilet routine, he could have taught Laurie a thing or two, for never once had Jellicoe ever peed in the house. Avril had felt bad blaming the smell on her dog, but admitting to her friend that her 6-year-old had peed out a lake on the back seat of her car was not something she cared to share with her. Her friend might believe that Avril had failed in her responsibilities to successfully toilet train her little girl. Avril knew Laurie's weak bladder was not her fault, and she didn't want her 6-year-old to be wearing nappies. The very idea was ridiculous. But this daughter of hers had become a liability on every single road trip she made with her children, when her bladder seemed to have a mind of its own and began to demand everyone's undivided attention. Avril quickly ground the high undie to a sharp, rather bumpy stop that had everybody suddenly thrust forward in their seats with a mighty jerk, as she hurriedly slammed on the brakes. It was still, of course, pouring with rain, but better her daughter relieve herself outside the car than all over the leather seats in the back, even if Laurie was to get soaked to the skin in the process. Avril could not face the disenchanting prospect of her car smelling of ammonia for months to come. Sometimes you did what you had to do, but why the hell did it have to be raining like this, making everything on this trip 100 times more tiresomely complicated, to such an extent that even her visibility was impaired due to this deluge? "Laurie, will you get out of the car right now?" Avril demanded, in a no-nonsense tone of voice. "I don't want you pee-peeing over the back seat. You're a big girl now. You don't need to wet yourself, do you? Big girls like you don't wet themselves. Only babies do that." Jellicoe let out an excited woof, as if the invitation to pee-pee had been extended to him as well. "Not you, Jellicoe," said Avril, putting a firm hand on her dog to steady his enthusiasm, and Jellicoe immediately quietened down on his owner's commands, realizing that he was obviously not included in the fun that this moment so clearly invited. "Go on, Laurie. Get out of the car, will you? I want you to get out of the car now. And do what you need to do, for God's sake, and be quick about it. But it's raining, Mummy. I'm going to get soaking wet. It's too bad, Laurie. You should have thought about that at our last road stop, shouldn't you? You're not going to pee on the back seat, and that is final. Last time I couldn't get rid of the abhorrent smell you left behind for months on end. It's not happening again. Not on my watch, anyway.
You heard, Mummy,
said Sam. You must get out of the car now. His nose wrinkled up in sheer disgust at the very thought of his sister peeing all over him. You're not going to pee over the back seat like you did last time. The smell was rank. What was wrong with his sister, he wondered. They had stopped at a rest stop a couple of hours earlier, and his sister hadn't wanted to go then. But now she decided this was the perfect time, when everyone was tightly cooped up in the car together in the pouring rain, trying to find the whereabouts of a remote cabin. Sam practically pushed his sister out of the door. He was terribly afraid that she might suddenly lose control over her bladder. Laurie belligerently stuck out her tongue at her brother. I'm getting out, she said in a squeaky voice. You don't have to be so mean, Sam. I can't help it if I need to pee. Laurie was clutching her flowery dress to her lower abdomen, as if trying to prevent the river within her from bursting its banks. Avril sighed with relief as her daughter climbed out of the car. At least one disaster had been averted for now. Avril assumed that Laurie would be squatting outside the door of the car to relieve herself as quickly as she could, and then obediently get straight back in. But 6-year-old Laurie did nothing of the kind. Laurie incongruously waddled into the middle of the road, like a duck, still clutching her skirt. And then she bent down, pulled down her pants, and began to squat in the middle of the road in front of Avril's Hyundai, as if making a complete spectacle of herself. She seemed completely unconcerned and oblivious that everyone was having a front row seat in watching her relieve herself. But nothing ever seemed to embarrass little Laurie, for she had very little self-consciousness, and if you needed to go, well, why not do it in front of a live audience while you were at it? What the hell is Laurie doing? Said Avril in astonishment, turning around to look at Sam in horror. Your sister is not exactly bashful, is she? She said with a bit of a chuckle in her voice, as Avril didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Honestly, that daughter of hers was the end. Some of her idiosyncratic behaviours were almost amusing, if not exceedingly frustrating, to say the very least. From the moment Laurie was born, she had been different to other kids her age, governed by her own set of rules, which dictated some of the bizarre choices she ultimately made. The rain spitefully continued to pelt down, but Laurie seemed unperturbed by the fact that she was getting soaking wet, almost as if it didn't matter at all. Why on earth is your sister squatting in the middle of the road like this? Goodness gracious me! Good job this isn't a highway, because she could have been mown down like a cat. I raised her to be discreet, but she doesn't seem to know the meaning of the word. Sam, who was watching his sister behaving so peculiarly and making such a bizarre, rather humiliating show of herself, could not help but burst out into laughter, as, like his mother, he found some of his sister's quirky, rather unorthodox behaviours very strange indeed. Sam knew, of course, that if he needed to relieve himself, he'd find a private tree on the opposite side of the road, and be quick and discreet about it, making absolutely certain that no one saw him going about his business. But his sister was cut out of a different cloth to him, that was for sure. Laurie finally, after thankfully relieving herself, steadily pulled up her pants and straightened out the pretty floral dress that she was wearing. Her clothes were saturated, her hair hanging in messy strands around her face, her skin glistening with water. She looked a sorry, miserable sight indeed, like a half-drowned kitten. She seemed unfazed, that she was getting soaked to the skin, and appeared momentarily distracted, as if forgetting that she was holding up 2 passengers in the car that were patiently waiting for her to return. It was as if she had all but forgotten that they were even there, and was caught up in her own bubble, as if she had all the time in the world to do what she wanted to do. For a moment she stood up and looked at some trees fringing the far side of the road, and her face suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, and she began to skip up and down like an ebullient puppy dog, and wave excitedly. "What is all that about, Sam?" asked Avril, looking directly at her son, as if Sam might have the answer to his sister's idiosyncratic performance. "Who on earth is Laurie waving at? As far as I can see, no one is out there. But look at her. She's completely animated. She doesn't seem to realize that she's soaked to the skin." "Maybe she's waving at a wild animal. She loves wild animals," said Sam with a cheeky grin on his face. "Honestly, that sister of yours can be such a dreadful liability," said Avril, shaking her head furiously. "Every time we go on a road trip, it's the same old story." Avril slammed her hand on the horn, and it made a loud noise. She wanted to get her daughter's attention, because Laurie was dawdling so much. "What on earth is she doing now?" said Avril, groaning in despair, as she watched her little daughter bending over a puddle of water, as if examining something intently. "Honestly, what is she doing now? I told her to relieve herself, not hold us up like this, while she examines every single puddle in the road. What is she so curious about? That's what I want to know." "Maybe she's found a frog," Sam suggested. "Laurie loves frogs. Remember the one she brought into the house last spring? It hopped around the place and Laurie was in her element." Avril rolled her eyes. She remembered the incident all too well, and didn't exactly want to be reminded of it. She recalled how absolutely elated Laurie had been with the hopping frog, which finally they'd taken to live in the goldfish pond at the back of the yard, and Laurie would often watch it sunning itself on the water lilies. She had given the frog a name, and told everyone who would listen that Bertie the frog had got very fat, as he ate so many flies. "I think he likes the goldfish pond," Laurie had told her mother proudly. "I'm sorry, Sam, but that is not going to happen. Not under this car roof, it's not. We're not having any frogs hopping around in here," said Avril resolutely, blasting the horn again, as her patience was wearing very thin. She was beginning to feel exceedingly annoyed with Laurie, who was certainly taking her time to get back to the car, almost as if holding up her mother in the pouring rain was the very least of her childlike concerns. Avril instinctively knew that by the time Laurie got back into the car, she'd be like a fish swimming around in a goldfish bowl. Jellicoe began to bark furiously, wagging his long blonde tail with a thumping ebullience, as if Laurie's exhibition of herself had made him very, very excited. If Jellicoe had his way, he'd be splashing around in those puddles, having the time of his life, kicking up water and mud everywhere, without a single worry in the world. Jellicoe never cared about the rain, and back in Toronto he was always fixated over the garden hose, and loved getting completely soaked by the water. Finally Laurie waddled back to the car, with a bashful grin on her face, clutching something disgustingly muddy to her chest. Avril once again groaned. Her daughter loved picking up stuff from odd places, and bringing these unmentionable things into her home. Sometimes she'd brought in insects, which she would put in a glass jar with holes in the top. One time she'd brought home a baby's dirty booty, and another time she'd found a dog's mangled-looking tennis ball that she'd brought home to gift Jellicoe with. What the hell was she bringing into the car this time, she wondered. "It better not be a dead animal that she's bringing in here," thought Avril, shuddering with disgust. She could imagine her daughter insisting that the deceased piece of roadkill that she had retrieved on the road, that she suddenly felt desperately sorry for, at the very least deserved a decent burial, and then Avril would have to conduct a funeral ceremony in the yard, like they had done once before, when Laurie had found a dead cat, once lying on their back step. Laurie had cried so many tears, as if she'd personally known the cat. They had put it in a shoebox and covered the gravesite with half the flowers in the yard. Avril's favourite flower bed had been decimated by her daughter's enthusiasm to give this deceased cat a send-off that would never be forgotten. Laurie climbed into the back seat, covering Avril's pristine leather seats with her sopping clothes, so that trickles of rainwater ran down the seats onto the carpet below. "All done, Mummy," she said proudly. "I can see you've finished your business, love," said Avril sarcastically. "You gave us quite a good show, did you not?" Oh, honestly. Next time, Laurie, don't relieve yourself in the middle of the road in front of our car like that. Find somewhere a little bit more private, will you? It's very unattractive watching someone answering a call of nature. You're lucky we're in the middle of nowhere. You should never relieve yourself in the middle of the road in the first place. It's not safe. Imagine if a car were to mow you down.
But I couldn't go anywhere else, said Laurie in defence. I had to go there and then. I was walking over to a tree on the other side of the road, but then...
I don't want to know. Please, Laurie, spare me the details, will you? There are some things I would rather not be informed about.
Look what I found, Mummy,
she said, leaning forward to the front seat and showing off a sopping wet rag doll, drenched to the skin in mud.
Look, it's a doll I found. I rescued it from the puddle out there. I saved her from drowning.
That's absolutely disgusting, love, said Avril, staring at her daughter incredulously, with an expression of dismayed revulsion on her face. At least it wasn't a dead animal that Laurie had brought into the car, but by the looks of things it was a close second for sure. Put it back where you found it, love. Get it out of here at once. It's absolutely revolting, and it smells nasty. Very nasty indeed.
No, I will not,
said Laurie, standing up for herself quite adamantly. She could be quite obstinate when she wanted to be.
Finders keepers. She's my doll from now on. Don't worry, Mummy, I'll clean her up when we get to the cabin. She's a little dirty, that's all. She needs a wash. Yuck, said Sam in disgust. It's disgusting. I'm sorry, but I've never liked your dolls. But this is the ugliest and worst doll you've ever had.
Laurie put her fingers to her lips.
Shh! She might hear what you're saying. She could be hurt by your words. She can't help it if she's dirty, can she?
Sam let out a scoff. Yeah, right. Your doll can talk. And she's got feelings, hasn't she?
She can hear every single word you say, said Laurie.
She doesn't like you, Sam.
She's just told me that I have a horrible, horrible brother who likes making fun of her. She's very hurt by you.
Well, I don't like her either, said Sam, snorting. Dolls are stupid. They're for girls. Throw it out, love, said Avril. We don't want that dirty thing in here. Please cast it out of the car, will you? It stinks to high heaven. How about we go to Canmore in the morning, and I buy you a brand new doll? Won't that be nice? A much prettier doll than that is. Have we got a deal? Avril was absolutely certain her daughter would rejoice at the very idea of acquiring a brand new doll, and would promptly throw out the revolting specimen that she had in her hand back into the rain and onto the road where it clearly belonged. But Avril had underestimated her daughter's extraordinary attachment to the doll that she found, and so it was clear that there was no wiggle room for any negotiations with a very stubborn 6-year-old.
I don't want another doll, ma'am. This doll is very, very special, so I only want her. She's the best doll in the whole world. She needs a new mummy because she doesn't have her old mummy anymore, and I'm going to watch over her. I'm going to keep her, said Laurie insistently. When she's cleaned up, Mummy, she'll be very pretty, I promise. I'm going to call her Annabelle, 'cause Annabelle's her name, and all the prettiest dolls in the whole world are called Annabelle.
Is that right? Said Avril. She sighed in exasperated resignation as she abruptly started up the engine. She reached over the seat to hand a large towel to her daughter that she always kept in the front when she travelled. Laurie, dry yourself with this towel, she demanded. I don't want you catching your death of cold. Look at you, you're shivering. Laurie gratefully took the towel. She began to dry her soaking wet hair and her clothes, along with wiping down the seats. She had certainly brought a lot of water into the car. Avril decided that for the time being she would say no more about the matter concerning the doll, but at the earliest convenience she would throw it away when Laurie wasn't looking, and feign surprise when the doll mysteriously went missing. What on earth was that doll doing, lying on a lonely, deserted country road in the middle of nowhere, she wondered. Who had the doll actually belonged to? "Oh, love, I forgot to ask you, who was that you were waving at in the woods over there? You were jumping up and down in great excitement, as if you saw someone you knew. I didn't see anybody there. Neither did your brother, did you, Sam?" "Because there was no one there," said Sam. "Laurie was waving at her invisible friend as usual. Isn't that right, Laurie?" "I don't have an invisible friend, silly," said Laurie, sticking out her tongue at her brother again. "I was waving at the bear man." "Bear man?" said Avril, sounding confounded. "You saw a bear, did you, love? Is that what you're saying?" "I didn't see a bear," said Laurie. "I told you I didn't see a bear. I know what a bear looks like, Mummy. I'm not stupid. I saw the bear man," she said insistently. "There is no bear man," said Sam. "You're lying, Laurie. You didn't see anything. You're making it all up." "I'm not a liar, and I'm not making it up, Sam. It was a bear man," said Laurie defiantly. "I bet you he wouldn't like you. Annabel here doesn't like you, and the bear man doesn't either. He only waved at me. You never even saw him." "Where exactly did you say we were going, Mum?" asked Sam, quick to change the subject, and ignoring his sister's cynical retort. Sam knew that Laurie indulged in a highly overactive imagination. She loved to play with her dolls for hours on end, and invite invisible guests to her imaginary tea parties. He was sure if there had been anything loitering around in the woods, his beady eyes would not have missed it for a beat. So his sister was of course making it all up, probably just to gain some attention. Avril must have been thinking the very same thing, for she didn't interrogate her daughter any more about the bear man she claimed to have seen. Her Hyundai continued to roll across the bumpy, very temperamental road at a relaxed pace, for she knew in these treacherous conditions you needed to drive with due caution, as the last thing that Avril wanted was to get her wheels wedged in the mud somewhere. "How many times do I have to tell you, Sam, where we're going? Have you got cauliflower in your ears or something?" she said sarcastically. What was it about her kids that made her need to repeat herself half a dozen times, as if they never listened to the first time when she answered a question? "I've forgotten where we're going, that's all," said Sam. "Well, Sam, as I've told you many times, we're going to stay at the Birchwood's cabin. You remember Mr. and Mrs. Birchwood, don't you?" "Oh, you mean the funny old lady with the pink hair that stands up like a hedgehog? The one who wears so much pink rouge all over her cheeks. She looks like a clown, and her husband's funny too. He also looks weird." "She's not a funny old lady, Sam. Mind how you talk about people, will you? That's not a nice thing to say about Mrs. Birchwood. And her hair does stand on end because it's a spiky hairstyle, which is very trendy and fashionable at the moment, I'll have you know. So it actually suits her. So don't be so condemning, will you?" "But I'm telling you the truth," Sam insisted. "She's a funny old lady, Mummy. She wears so much pink. I've never ever seen her wear any other colour." "Well, Mrs. Birchwood loves pink, doesn't she? Nothing wrong with that at all. Just like your sister loves pink. It's a very feminine colour." "Yeah, and I love blue, but I don't wear it all the time, do I, Mum? Nor do I dye my hair blue." "Well, it's a good job you don't dye your hair blue, love. You'd be kicked out of school very fast. I can't imagine how Mrs. Carter-Barry would react if you were sent to her offices with blue hair. I wouldn't hear the end of it from the woman. I would ultimately be blamed, of course, as Mrs. Carter-Barry believes that all children are an extension of their parents. So if you were to dye your hair blue, Sam, it will all be my fault, which would make me a very bad mother." "Well, then maybe I should dye my hair blue then. It would be funny to see how Mrs. Carter-Barry would react. She'd probably have kittens, wouldn't she, Mum? She'd send me straight back home, and I'd never have to go to school ever again. That would be so, so cool." "You cheeky, cheeky thing. What a naughty thing for you to say, Sam," said Avril with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. Don't get any funny ideas into your head, young man. I certainly don't need Mrs. Carter-Barry breathing down my neck like the proverbial dragon. And if you went to school with blue hair, I'd never hear the end of it from that nasty woman. No matter what you say, Mum, Mrs. Birchwood is a funny old lady. She really is super weird. She thinks she's Cinderella, but she's too old for all that. Well, if you want to call Mrs. Birchwood a funny old lady, you make sure, Sam, you don't say it when she's around. Is that understood? I'm not stupid, Mum, said Sam. Nor am I rude. Of course I wouldn't say that to her face. That would be a horrible thing to do. I'm not like that. Good, I'm glad to hear it. The Birchwoods are exceedingly good friends of your grandparents. They're the same age, you see. My mother has known the Birchwoods for many years. She went to school with Mrs. Birchwood, you know. The Birchwoods are getting on in age, as are my own parents, so they don't use the cabin very much these days, so they often rent the place out to strangers. And, well, they've been terribly kind. They've allowed me to use their cabin for 6 weeks. Isn't that nice of them? I suppose so, said Sam. If they're not using it, I suppose it is a nice thing to do. Well, there you go, then. You see, kids, the lady who looks after the cabin, while the Birchwoods are not present, well, her name is Hilda. She cleans the place up for them, and lives in the nearby town of Camville. She's very kindly offered to look after the both of you, while I get down to some much-needed hard work. She'll be staying in the cabin with us, cleaning the cabin, cooking, looking after you, showing you all a good time. And I understand she's in her early 20s, and is particularly good with children, so I'm sure you're going to have a great deal of fun with her. And as for Jellicoe over here, well, he's going to have the time of his life running around this vast space, don't you think? Instead of our very small backyard in Toronto. He's going to think that heaven has landed, I suspect. But why do we have to come here in the first place? You normally work from home, don't you, Mum? Sam was quick to point out. You work in the office at home, and Daddy goes to the office in the city. So why are you going to work in the Birchwoods cabin, out here in the middle of nowhere? Yes, you make a very good point, love. And it is true. I do normally work from the office at home, but I'm suffering from what is known as writer's block. So I thought a change of scene would do me good. It was your grandmother's idea, if you must know, for us to come here. Your dad's not remotely happy, of course, about being abandoned for 6 weeks, but he understands why we're going away. So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.